Hey guys, got some fresh news here regarding the Help to Buy scheme. This is something we've been following for a couple of years, feels like forever. And the news is it's passed through the Senate. The Greens have caved. The Greens basically wanted all this other stuff, negative gearing for one to be scrapped. There's been a whole other bunch of demands which eventually they've caved in. So um, now this scheme has a green light to go through. So what I want to do today is talk about briefly what happened, although I've basically given you the rundown just now. Who's going to win out of this? What this means for the property market short term and what it means for the property market long term. I'm just going to try and sum it up as soon as possible. One thing to note before we get started is the build to rent bill is going through as well. I'm not sure if that's the same bill or separate. I think it's a separate one. The build to rent, I want to comment on another time. But basically, what that is the government are giving investors, developers, incentives, subsidies to rent out these properties, some of them to people in need who need to rent. So, what is kind of swept under the rug with the build to rent is these are large developments. Like, this is not mum and dad investors doing these sorts of developments. Quite often, they're large corporations, and not even Australian corporations some of the time. So it's another scheme that basically pushes up the value of land, because if big multinationals are buying up big parcels of land, yeah, they might be able to rent people at an affordable price. I have my doubts on that. It sounds like one of those things governments do, meaning really well, but at the end of the day, they are the cause of their own kind of demise, and it just makes things harder for people out there. Anyway, that topic's for another day. So, Help to Buy. What I'm going to say who's going to win out of this, but what actually is it? So it's a government co-ownership scheme. What does that mean? It means if you want to buy a property, the government's going to pitch in up to 40% for new builds, house and lands off the plans, or 30% if it's an established dwelling. So if you can only afford a borrowing amount of $500,000, the government can come to the rescue. Say if it's an established property with pitching in 30% of the property value. So I don't know what that is. It makes it like a $700,000 property. Probably should have done my research before filming. But let's say it's a $700,000 property. That person before would have only been able to access, if they had a minimal deposit, something like a $500,000 property, maybe a little bit above. So what it's doing is pushing a lot more cash into the market. So there should be some pretty obvious things that you can see happening out of this. A few things to note with how it's proposed so far is it's only for low income earners. So 120K for a couple, 90K for a single. So they are limited in what their borrowing powers are. Probably 500, 450. You looking at that sort of region as a maximum, assuming they don't have any other debts or HECS and they've got minimal living expenses. So those guys are going to win. Now, you can make an argument that if the government's owning 40% of the property, are you really winning? And I get that. I've made that argument in the past. But when you step in the shoes of someone who is a low-income earner and they're paying rent and they're struggling to pay the rent, this is going to be a game changer for them. I'll set out another video later on if that's you, and it'll kind of go deep into into the weeds and how you can get into this scheme if it ends up going through, which it looks like it's going to do. these guys, these low income earners who can't get in the property market, is a real opportunity for them. As much as I don't like the scheme and I think it's going to push the property market higher, it's a real opportunity for them. The other incentive for this scheme is what was the other incentive of this scheme? There's only 10,000 spots available per year. They say 40,000 in the articles, but I think if you look, that's 10,000 per year over 4 years. So it is limited. The thing I want to note about these sorts of schemes, and if you follow me on the channel before, I always talk about the first homeowner grant, which is brought in by the federal government in 2000 as a deal sweetener for the CGT, or the capital gain, not the capital gains, the GST tax reforms. And over the last 24 years, it's morphed into all this different stuff. Now, I think every state has a first homeowner grant, at least a lot of them do still in some form or another. So, once they turn the tap on, the tap keeps on getting turned on. So you can guarantee with this that things will change and it will get access. Australians will get more access to it. If you look at the new home guarantee or the first home guarantee or whatever you want to call it, they've changed that name a few times. FHLDS was the original, First Home Loan Deposit Scheme was the original name. I think they made that available to 10,000 people per year. Then they added things on like single family, regional home, new home guarantee, and they've opened that up for 50,000 spots per year as well. So these things morph and change, and this is a thing I think that's worth knowing. And before I get in, I'm going to come back. Sorry, guys, I'm circling around a bit. The other thing, if you are looking to take advantage of this, you only need a 2% deposit. It sounds pretty crazy, but that's what it is. That doesn't look like it's going to change either. So for most people, being able to get 2% deposit, it should be pretty easy. It's not much money. If you can't get a 2% deposit together, really you should be questioning if you can get a home loan. So what does this mean for the market in the short term? Well, we don't know. They're saying only 10,000 spots, but that is 10,000 spots into, I guess you could say, the lower end of the market now, 800 grand and below. Because if your maximum borrowing is 500, then you chuck 30% or 40% on top. That's going to be around 800, maybe a little bit north of 800 there. So it's going to affect those sorts of markets. How? At the start, we don't know. No one's going to know the effect that 10,000 new purchases coming into the market has on the overall market. I think it's really hard to find actual data on how these sorts of schemes affect the overall market. All we have is anecdotal evidence from the very first inception of the first homeowner grant, and a whole raft of other first home buyer schemes and home buyer schemes that have happened over the last 25 years. So short term, we don't know what it's going to do. All we know is it's going to pump more money into the market. So we already know there's a market shortage. In some places, like here in Melbourne, people are chucking houses on the market. They're selling up. What impact is that going to play on the overall demand-supply ratio? Is it going to put so much more demand into the market that we get a short-term pump in those lower markets? Let's wait and see. I think longer term, what's going to happen is these schemes are just going to morph and change. So if you look at it on the aggregate, all it's going to do is pump more money into a market. I'd use that example of someone that could only afford 500 grand. Well, maybe they were looking for an apartment at 500 grand. Maybe they were thinking, look, I'm just going to get into the market. I'm going to save up whatever the minimum deposit is, probably 5%, to get into the market in an apartment at 500 grand. Whereas now, if they get access to this scheme, well, their maximum purchase price is now over 800 grand, around or over 800 grand. So, that's getting them into higher, you know, I guess you could say higher quality property, but also it's creating a lot more demand in that those lower price properties. So those prices are going to get bidded up. So long term, it's going to add more demand in the market. It's going to push more money into the market. The other thing I want to say about the long term is this is just a band-aid solution, which is what all the other band-aid solutions have done, which is not much. They push the property price up. And I'm really concerned because as a mortgage broker, I'm sitting there going, well, the great Australian dream is gone because these people only own 60% of their property, so they don't even own their own property. They co-own it with the government. 40 up to 40%. That's pushing into, it's pushing into communism. Let's be honest. And there was another stat out the other day, I think, where it was something crazy. I can't remember if it was Victoria or the Nation. It was 24 people, basically employed on the public purse. It's not going in a good place there. Let's be honest. But going back to home ownership, if you've got a 30-year loan for only 60% or 70% of the value of the property, the average first home buyer now is 36 or 37. Now, they might be a bit younger if they can get into this scheme. However, the thing is, if they still take, let's say they're 30 years old and they get a 30-year loan, they're still going to be 60 years old. And then what do they do with the remainder 40%? Now, the 40% is going to be what the 40% is worth whenever they want to buy it back from the government. So it doesn't inflate away. The government share is always 40% of the property. So if the home buyer is 30 years old, they take 30 years to pay off their loan, and then they still need to buy their 40% or 30% or whatever it is back from the government. How are they going to save for retirement? We are relying on the government to put together a super policy that's going to work for everyone. And clearly that's not working for everyone yet, because we've moved up from the employer contribution of 9.5% over the last few years to 12%, which will be next year. So clearly all of their plans, all of their modelling, all of the best advice for the last 30 years wasn't working. And it just feels like they're doubling down. And I feel like I'm a broken record here. Let me know if you disagree. People, I can't really articulate it very well, but people kind of think they should just rely on the government to sort stuff out for them. And that's not the case. And the truth is people are more indebted, whether you've got these schemes or not. And actually what they need to do is have that mindset that our parents had and our grandparents had, where they're almost allergic to debt. They didn't like debt. They wanted to get rid of debt. Now, that's hard now because houses are so expensive, but the debt needs to come down. So I am putting together a debt repayment program. If you've got a home loan already, debt destroyers, get in contact with me. That's getting started really soon. We're almost there. Comments below, appreciated. This is a wide-ranging topic. It's the housing crisis, but it really involves kind of our society as a whole, because if people don't have access to housing, then we don't really have a higher standard of living, and this A-grade society, this first world society we live in, could be argued that it's a mirage if people don't have a place to live. That's it. Thanks, guys. Cheers.